Starting any new hobby can be intimidating, and it's usually because you don't know what you don't know. And even with all the best intentions, it can sometimes be a concern that you're going to break some unwritten rule that you didn't know about. To be honest, some of the content in this video is going to trigger some people, but this is the voice of many riders that I've spoken to over the years, and the reason we're raising all of this is for the longevity of adventure riding. So if you're new to adventure riding, here are a few track etiquette rules that are going to make things safer and more fun. All right, the first one here is give traffic coming the opposite direction the finger. So you're going to go that way, not that way, and say how many riders you have in your group. So as you're riding along, just say hi with a raised number of fingers of however many riders are in your group. So if you're riding solo, give them one, not that one, that one. But obviously if you're in a group that's greater than 5, unless you're from, then you can put up a whole hand just to say that it is greater than 5. Expect more than 5 bikes coming the opposite direction. A lot of cars do pull over and allow bikes to go past, so you're giving them an indication of how many bikes to expect. All right, this one is probably going to trigger a couple of people, but please, if we can keep the comments positive, that would be wonderful. It always has been really, really positive, so let's keep it that way. Now, gates have 2 purposes, either to keep something in or keep something out. Arriving at a gate doesn't necessarily mean you can't proceed. There's a lot of roads, once you get outside of the city, that go through properties. So the road itself is public, the property either side is private. So the gate is, if it's not locked, it is okay to proceed. However, check the signs. There will always be a sign telling you what the go is. That obviously brings in the next etiquette piece, which is leave the gate as you found it. So if it was closed, make sure you close it behind you. Sometimes the gates can be a little hard to read. We found a couple where it looked like it was saying private property, but what it was meaning was it was private property on the sides, stopping people from camping on their property, but the road itself is public and it's okay to pass through. However, a locked gate is there to keep us out. Now, when we arrive at one of these locked gates, it's not up to us to argue whether it should or shouldn't be locked. It's up to us to honour it. It is there for a reason, and my advice is go and find out the reason, rather than just getting your panties in a knot and going and thinking it's some sort of vendetta against you personally. It's not. It's there for a reason. There was almost always a genuine reason why it's locked, and usually it's about longevity. Lock gates can be frustrating, and some of our favourite places aren't immune to receiving them.
That's closed?
Yeah. And the thing is, bypassing a locked gate is only going to reinforce why the lock gate was there in the first place. So honour the gate in the way that it is there. Find out the real reasons, and if you disagree with it still after finding out the real reasons, go and have a conversation with your local member or the national state bodies to try and understand how we can work around it. We all love the sweet music of our exhaust systems, however, horses, not so much. So if you do see a riding group, it's always a nice thing just to pull over, switch off the engine for just a moment and let them pass.
Thank you.
No worries.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Horses get spooked really easily, and their riders are just out enjoying the outdoors the same way we are. So it really makes a difference, and they really appreciate anyone pulling over and stopping for just that moment. When you approach a challenge like a creek crossing or a muddy section, then your nerves get up a little bit and your heart rate rises, but you've got to remember to leave a nice gap between you and the bike in front of you. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One is that we want that bike to be able to get through the challenge without falling over, and there's nothing worse than worrying about being run over by another bike. It's a bit annoying when that happens. It also gives you greater visibility of the challenge itself, so particularly if it's like a creek crossing and the bike in front disappears into a hole and they're never seen again, then maybe go the other side. And of course, the other key thing is you want to be able to get through that challenge with the right amount of momentum. Momentum is king, and you don't want it to be dictated by the bike that's in front of you. Roads and tracks, just like us, come in all different shapes and sizes. So where you position yourself on the road changes in all sorts of different situations. One primary rule that you always need to remember is to keep left. However, if the road is built for vehicles as wide as cars and trucks, then why can't we use both sides of the roads? Well, there's sometimes that you shouldn't, and there's sometimes that you should. Blind corners and crests are the obvious place to keep left. If 2 bikes are keeping to their left, then they're never going to collide. However, it's not always as easy as that. Of course, our two-wheeled bikes are a lot more vulnerable to the terrain, much more than our four-wheeled counterparts. But this is probably where I see most beginners heading on to the wrong side of the road, is to avoid what's in front of them. However, our bike suspension can endure a lot more than we think it can, and as beginners we tend to over-focus on the little bumps and stuff that's in front of us, rather than the big bull bar that might be coming around the opposite direction. When approaching left-hand corners, it actually can be quite advantageous to be in the right-hand lane to give us greater visibility through the corner. However, obviously the intent is to get over to the left when we can. But our position on the road is going to be the leading factor to how people react when you're suddenly in front of them. Just like walking down the street and you don't know which way to go when you come towards someone, we want to create a predictable outcome for those instinctive reactions. In other words, if we're more over to the left, then they're more likely to avoid us by going around to their left rather than freezing up and not knowing where to go. There's also nothing wrong with two bikes going side by side on a straight bit of road. I do it all the time when I'm filming people. I'll ride alongside of them. I'm actually looking ahead of my eyeballs while the camera faces down towards them. However, that's only possible because I'm leaving plenty of room to pull back in behind them before we get to a crest or a corner. The other part of keeping left is if you're a beginner, and then particularly if you're on a tour or a large group, then there's going to be people that will need to get by, particularly sweeps and so on. So you want to be always keeping on the left-hand side to give them plenty of room to make the pass. Just always remind yourself that there could be something coming the other direction. And of course, there is a mix of drivers on our roads, and some of them are reckless, and incidents usually happen when we combine two pieces of recklessness. And last but not least, always stop and help a fellow rider. You never know who you're going to make friends with by sharing a few cable ties. And there's always going to be the time where you're on the side of the road as well. That's one of the parts of motorcycling, so look out for each other. If you spot a motorcycle on the side of the road, go and give them a hand. All right, that's it. So it's not a rule book, it's just a whole bunch of common sense, but all these little unwritten rules will help you stay safe and have fun.